Welcome into another edition of the James Boyd Podcast. I am James Boyd, of course, but I am not joined by my editor, Jim Aiello. I am joined by my colleague, Paul Dehner. Paul, how you doing? I mean, obviously, I don't expect to speak to you, I guess, that often during the off season, but a little bit of short notice. Thank you for coming on the pod, talk about the latest news, obviously being the Colts hiring Lou Anarumo as their DC. So while I have my thoughts, I want to just get your thoughts as well on him joining forces with Shane Steichen in Indianapolis.
Yeah, well, isn't it just about trying to keep the easiest commute, right? I mean, it's just as easy. I mean, you just
This is
ride up
true.
to I-74, just a couple hours, easy trip. It's much easier. You don't even have to hire movers. You can just do a couple back and forth trips. Makes it a lot easier. Now, I mean, yeah, this was a thing where I think one thing that happened when Lou Anarumo was fired. I mean, he was here for 6 years, and was viewed as a centerpiece of their championship runs. I mean, when they went to the Super Bowl and then the AFC Championship in back-to-back years, Burrow and the offense drew all the headlines, but quietly, it was Lou Anarumo's defense that really drove those runs. I mean, they had on their run to the Super Bowl, the last play of each win in the AFC run was a turnover. I mean, that was how they were winning games. They found ways to go win those games by the defense making the plays to set up an offense that had a bad offensive line and was struggling. And in 2022, I mean, they were a juggernaut. They won 10 games in a row until they lost to Kansas City in the AFC Championship game, largely behind a top 10 defense that was making every play and really lose game plans, specifically in the playoffs, were masterful. I mean, he was kind of getting this reputation as the Mahomes killer. And it was like, oh, this is the one guy that has an answer for Patrick Mahomes. And maybe his best game plan he ever had was in a dominant win in the snow, ironically enough, in Buffalo, where they went up there and dominated in 2022 to win that game and left Stephon Diggs angry and Josh Allen frustrated and everybody under fire there. That was his reputation. I mean, and so he always had that respect. Nobody thought he didn't know how to coach. Nobody ever thought that he didn't have an idea of what the NFL looks like from a defensive perspective. Just the last 2 years, there's been a disconnect between scheme, personnel, a bunch of underperforming young players that turned things totally sideways. And everybody acknowledged a fresh start. Not that Lou Anarumo wasn't still a good coordinator, just that it had to be a fresh start here. I mean, he'd been here for 6 years. It's a long time.
I think that's the point I want to drive home. Now, obviously, here in Indianapolis, people were not pleased with Gus Bradley, cover three scheme. I'm sorry, Legion of Boom, and we know all of his lore in football, right? And all the things he's done that were great. But his 3 years in Indianapolis, he was held over from the Reich staff when Shane was brought in. They weren't good. They finished 28th in scoring defense in 2022, 28th again 2023, and then 24th this past year. Although if you look at the point differential, it's about the same as it's ever been. They haven't really improved in that area. And so immediately the reaction on Twitter, because I go to Twitter for all of my, really hard-hitting reactions and takes and things like that, was, oh my gosh, the Colts just hired a guy who's terrible. Why would they pick this guy? So can you maybe elaborate? I know you wrote about this in the piece we have up there, so I encourage anyone listening to check out our piece on The Athletic about the hire, the context around it. But you touched on the personnel differences not matching the scheme, which I think was also a bit true here in Indianapolis, and I'm curious to see how Chris Ballard and company will maybe change the players they bring in to help Lou in his first season in Indianapolis. But to your point, why do you think it shifted so much from what we saw during those really great runs that the Bengals had to where it was like, oh my gosh, does Josh Allen not Josh Allen, does Joe Burrow even have a defense in Cincinnati?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah,
I've been there a few times, but I was like, I ain't seen nobody out here defending anything,
no,
on the field.
No, it was bad. This past year was as bad as I've ever seen. And I've covered some bad teams. It was awful. There's a couple of key points here that Colts fans are going to want to keep in mind. The backbone of those great Anarumo defenses were the safeties, were high intelligent. I mean, because his scheme is complicated. Okay, he is the master of disguise, and there's a lot of timing. There's a lot of pass offs. There's a lot of communication that is extra important in what he likes to run. And when he had Jesse Bates and Von Bell together, it was what made it go. And their ability to keep everybody on the same page, to put out fires that went sideways, to make plays on the ball, to keep everything in front. I mean, they were such a big part of that, of everything he was doing. And when he lost both of them in one offseason, and Jesse Bates went to Atlanta and Von Bell went to Carolina, and they tried to replace them, with a first round pick and with, another, they thought they had a plan. It fell apart. He famously, in Indianapolis, actually at the combine before that free agency period, didn't even want to talk about the idea of losing Jesse Bates or Von Bell. And someone broached the idea of what about both? And he just said, that would be a dark day. And it turned out to be the most prophetic statement of that entire season, because the entire defense fell apart without those guys there. And it was a mess. They were last in the league in explosive plays allowed in 2023. So they tried to fix that. They brought Von Bell back. They moved Dax Hill away from safety. They tried some new pieces out in the safety room. They signed Geno Stone, who was kind of a, not as athletic, but known to be an intelligent, savvy type of player. Well, then they got slower, and they lost DJ Reader at defensive tackle, and they didn't really properly replace him. And they had a first round pick on the defensive line that wasn't panning out, Miles Murphy. And now all of a sudden they had no pass rush, and they had a slow defense, and they still weren't really communicating that well. And then you get the disaster that happened this year. And so it all started with the safeties, and it has kind of shifted. And that became a major issue when you have a scheme that is not A1 day one easy stuff. Okay. I mean, he used to talk about Jesse Bates and Von Bell playing together at the 400 level. Like he'd be like, this is advanced master's class type stuff. When you don't have that, and he wants to do that, and that's part of what you have with him, it can fall apart quickly.
I think that is a great point you just made. And obviously we will have a chance to talk to Lou himself about personnel and things like that. But when you mention safeties, that's an area where the Colts were okay this past season, but they weren't great. And that is an area where they probably have to upgrade. And what's funny about this is we pounded the table when it came to their safeties going into the season, because we were like, man, there's some good ones still out here. Spend some money in free agency. Maybe you are, a playoff team. Maybe you are 2 wins better and you're 10-7 instead of 8-9 or whatever. But the difference here in Indianapolis, Paul, and I guess it's similar to Cincinnati. Sometimes it feels like the team is just too cheap to go and get better.
Yeah.
Seriously. And I say that like, I couldn't believe my first joint practice I ever went to with Cincinnati earlier this year, or actually last year technically, but seeing the players cross the street with my own 2 eyes for the first time was nuts. I was just like,
yeah,
what is this? Like, it's like watching like a little league practice. And I'm like, I'm hearing cleats on pavement. What is going on?
Yeah.
And kind of getting back to the point here, I think the Colts' safety play was okay, but not great enough, or maybe not good enough for what Lou will want to do. They have some answers to, kind of review, or they have some questions to answer rather when it comes to, do you bring back Julian Blackmon, who's a good safety for them, but he's only good when he's healthy. He's been hurt the last few years. Told us at the end of the year he played with a torn right labrum basically since week 1, and you could tell that he wasn't the same player that he was during camp. And then another thing is just Nick Cross. All the Colts fans are telling me, he's got all these tackles. It's not great when your safety has a bunch of tackles. And so to that point, I want to know, and maybe this is getting too far in the weeds, but just let me know if I'm getting too far in. But how much do the linebacker play, how much does that weigh into how he moves or shifts his defense? Because one of the things we felt like, just watching a lot of these games, when I say we, I mean, me and other Colts reporters and people I've talked to in the building, the middle of the field, they just got crushed on. So how do linebackers kind of play in Lou's system? Or really, is it something where he is able to adapt, as they say, and be the mad scientist?
Yeah. I mean, it's not, I mean, he does a lot. You'll see a lot of, surprises like defensive linemen dropping back. Actually Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson dropped back at like a top 5 rate in terms this year, in terms of just dropping back into coverage amongst all edge defenders. And you'll see that, he'll do stuff like that where all of a sudden he'll have that drop back. You'll see, is that Sam Hubbard in some of his best plays would all of a sudden be lined up at linebacker, and Logan Wilson would be down there on the edge, and they'd be bringing him in that just to confuse, and it would work. And you'd see the defense not knowing what to do, not being able to react. And so there's a lot of moving. There's some moving around there. But the linebacker play is I mean, when his defense has been at its best, it's certainly been, those guys have been driving it, but he doesn't ask them to do too much. I mean, you just be solid, make tackles, understand what's going on, communicate, all that the normal stuff. I don't think he tries to put too much on the linebackers. I think a lot of the stress ends up on the back end. But you've got to be able to do everything. I just think he's very much multiple. He very much has the defense doing all kinds of different stuff that keeps the quarterback off balance. So just try to keep, he's not going to blitz all the time, but he's going to save it for big spots when they're not used to it. So this isn't some Wink Martindale coming at you. No, he's going to blitz. Yeah. He's going to blitz at a bottom 10 rate. Okay. But it's going to show up on 3rd and 7 in the 4th quarter in the red zone out of nowhere with a 0. Right. And it's like, and it'll be extra surprising. He masterfully used Mike Hilton in that way, who's one of the best blitzing slots in the entire league. And I'm sure Kenny Moore will maybe be a guy he can try to use similarly, and he'll enjoy, finding ways to use. But like, Hilton had great timing. He would use it over and over again, coming in in these big moments and keep it where they just never quite saw it coming. And so he's using all of these pieces, whether it's linebacker, whether it's an edge rusher, whether it's a slot corner. He likes versatility, and he likes guys that can do different things to keep the offense off balance with what he's trying to do to them.
That's really interesting, mainly because the back end is young too. They're inexperienced. Mm-hmm. I mean, their biggest addition, the Colts, that is, this past season when it came to their secondary, was signing Sam Womack off of waivers from the 49ers. And he was an okay cornerback, had a pretty good season considering when he was brought in and what he was asked to do. But I'm curious to see, again, will they try to bolster that back in a little bit more? Because that's the other thing is, we can talk about defensive schemes all we want and what coaches like to do, but you need players too. And I think that was what stood out to me when I looked at, just briefly, when I was going through all the different candidates, whether it was Steve Wilkes or Wink Martindale or others, and obviously Lou, looked at the Bengals, and I'm like, man, like, they lost a lot of key guys. And it's just hard to – it's the NFL, Paul, you know this. It's hard to have success when you don't have dudes. And so you need a few dudes. I mean, obviously Trey Hendrickson is amazing, and Colts fans want him to get traded tomorrow. That's not going to happen. But you need some players. And so I'm curious, again, to see – if this changes their draft approach, their free agency approach. And I know Chris Ballard kind of hinted at being more aggressive in free agency and spending some money, because I think you have to. Now, obviously, you can't be wild, but when you look at some of these teams in the playoffs, there have obviously been key additions on both sides of the ball. And I look at, the Commanders, for example, they really, upgraded defensively and got some playmakers in there. And I'm curious to see if the Colts can do the same. The other thing I want to hit on, though, Paul, is from a leadership standpoint and just a demeanor standpoint. I mean, you talked to this guy for years. How would you describe the way Lou carries himself and the respect the players have for him? Because even though, like you said, it ended the way it ended in Cincinnati, the vibe I get or have gotten is that the players did respect what he brought to the organization.
Yeah, so Lou's a no-nonsense Staten Island guy, right? You'll know this the moment you talk to him. He's straight shooting. He's blunt. He's honest. He's tough. And he is Staten Island through and through. Like, it's just, that's who he is. Okay. He doesn't mess around. And so players like that. Players have responded to that style. He's unrelenting, but the forthright honesty, I think, has always helped him connect, with everybody that's been under him. And they have really liked him. The interesting offshoot of this, and this connects kind of the entire conversation, and really, in my opinion, my argument the biggest reason he's not here anymore is he ended up having trouble connecting with the younger players on this roster. And that's a chicken and the egg argument. It is, were they bad players, or were they good players that he couldn't get it out of them, right? Or they had him in the wrong spot or not using him properly. They had a lot of players who were rotating and getting benched, and then it would hurt their confidence and have to bring them back. And they brought Von Bell back as a veteran safety after letting him go this past year. Well, it put him right ahead of Jordan Battle, a young player who kind of took that the wrong way, and he didn't quite get to where he needed to be to really assume that role. And there's just a lot of that going on. Mike Hilton was frustrated with getting pulled off the field on third downs this past year. They had benched Cam Taylor-Britt, and there's lots of stuff going on. Just everything seemed to go sideways. What you had was a roster where they tried to, when they knew they're paying on offense, so they were trying to rebuild on defense with picks. They had 9 top 100 picks on rookie contracts, and every one of them, to a man, disappointed. Every one of them did not live up to the glimpses, to foundation, to their draft status. These weren't guys, for the most part, that like the rest of the league was going to pass on. They were going to be 6th-round picks. These were all guys that were, everybody admits these are top 100 guys. Like, these are guys that are going to go off the board, and they just weren't getting it out of them. And that's how they were trying to build this defense. And so when that happens, and you have benchings and rotations and frustration, and a guy like Dax Hill, who was a 1st-round pick and sat for a year he like was put into different positions in the background and couldn't even learn anything. And then he comes into play safety and he's bad and gets thrown under the bus for being the reason the team stunk. And they move him to outside corner and he gets hurt. Now you have a guy on a 1st-round pick who really, you feel like you haven't even really seen play in the position he's best at. Miles Murphy, a 1st-round pick who basically hardly even could get on the field last year, as he kind of stuck with his veterans, and you saw he had flashes but couldn't quite do it, and then he couldn't quite get into a full-time role this year. Is that his fault? Is he a bad pick? Is he not getting the runway to go grow and prove it? Is he not getting developed properly? Like, all of these questions kind of piled up over the course of the last couple of years with all of these young players. And I think that was a point. And then it was how many of them are not playing confidently because the scheme is too complicated for them. And you got to this middle part of the season where these young players were just lost out there and not confident in what they were doing. And they were giving up. They lost to Baltimore, they lost to the Chargers, and they lost to the Steelers. They scored 27 more points in each one. They gave up 35. They gave up 34. They gave up 44 to Russell Wilson, and their season was over. And after that, they simplified the scheme, and they played much better down the stretch. And the question being obvious, why would you not have simplified this so much earlier in the season if you have all these young players that are lost and lacking confidence? Let them go play confident and start building it back up. And I think that was a big question with their entire season. Would they be in the playoffs if they would have just simplified their scheme a month or two earlier? I mean, you can't have that. It can't make it that far in and have the same problems and getting worse. And so that's the question. I think that's kind of the concern. Is he's always liked to play as veteran. He likes veterans. He's a veteran guy because, for reasons we've talked about, can he play and connect with young players and get the most out of them? He's done it in the past. It's not like it's impossible, but he's a guy who likes his vets. And so how much will he need to lean into that? How dependent will Indianapolis be on young players developing, and will he be able to do that? I think those are all questions that will play out. And maybe those are lessons he learned here over the last couple of years. But either way, something to certainly keep in your back pocket as you watch next year develop.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see how he meshes with this group. And you mentioned having veterans. The Colts, quite frankly, on the back end, didn't have many going into last season and still don't have that many now. I mean, Julian Blackmon, like I said, is a free agent. He's a veteran guy. Kenny Moore is probably the top veteran presence in that secondary. But then beyond him, you have Jalen Jones, who started at cornerback. He's going into his 3rd year. Juju Brents, your 2nd-round pick from a couple years ago, he's been injury prone. He has barely even played. He's going into his 3rd year with a ton of question marks. And I wouldn't even put him as a potential, like a starter right now, quite honestly, because he's been hurt so much. And you have Sam Womack, who I said, again, good player, a little bit of a diamond in the rough, but how many guys you're going to find, right? That are overlooked by everyone and they suddenly become stars with you. So I'm curious to see how that goes on. And also, it's funny you mentioned the no nonsense thing, because one of the biggest things the Colts had to deal with this past season was nonsense. And just, I mean, obviously the quarterback situation was what it was. I'm sure you saw from afar the mess that I found myself in covering this team, which happens, on a biannual basis, it seems like. But beyond that, one of the most egregious things that happened this past season, you talked about some of the Bengals, is defensive lapses and just terrible performances. This Colts team, when I knew, this is like the nail in the coffin, when I knew Gus Bradley, like, there's no chance you're coming back, they lost to the Giants in New York, 45-33. The Giants ended the year with the second lowest scoring average in the league. They had averaged like 14 points a game coming into that game, give up 38 on defense and another kick return touchdown to boot. Like, it was horrible. And I remember thinking, oh man, this is it. Like, this has to change. And one of the other things that DeForest Buckner mentioned on top of, hey, yeah, we changed our defensive coordinator, but look, we got to figure out, what's going on with the team itself, the players. And he mentioned ego as a big problem within the Colts defense. And so, again, you mentioned how Lou's no nonsense. Well, how do you address that, with the team that is coming off of what DeForest Buckner called the worst defensive performance or defensive unit he's been a part of since he's been here? Now, that guy, when he talks, he can speak. Paul, he can say some things. I'm sure you know a lot about him and what he's done in the NFL. But beyond that, it's like, who else he got over there? And then the other thing I wanted to kind of hit on with you is when you look at, how things ended for Gus here with the Colts, when did you all know, okay, Lou, this might be it? Because obviously, again, I think it was easier for the Colts to move on from Gus Bradley because, one, the defense wasn't good. Two, they hadn't made the playoffs in the 3 years he was here. And then three, his contract actually expired at the end of the 2024 season. So they didn't have to fire him. They just had to move on from him, which is why they use the term parts ways. Which is always a nice way of saying you got canned. Yeah. But when did you all know, okay, this guy who helped us make this run when it comes to the Bengals, when did you all on the beat or even around that team just start to know he's got to probably, start fresh somewhere else?
I mean, I think around mid-season there were whispers, where it's like when things were going sideways. And I mean, because they started so poorly. They started 0-3, 1-4, and it was almost all because of the defense. And it was bad. But really, it was over December 1st at 4:05. They lost to the Steelers. They gave up 44 to Russell Wilson, a game they absolutely had to have. They were on the brink. And you score 38 and lose to the Steelers, to a bad offense at home to basically eliminate you. They go to 4-8, and it was over. It was over at that point. They won 5 in a row. The defense played much better after that.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. It ended that day. RIP. That was it. You know what I mean? It was like it couldn't be that. There was no coming back from that. I think it was probably internally in most people's heads over before that, but that was like coffin nails. You know what I mean? There's no coming back from that moment. And really those 3 games in a row where they lose on Thursday night in Baltimore, 35-34, and then they lose the game to the Chargers where they give up 24 first half points to Justin Herbert, and they're down 24-6. Like it's just. That can't happen in your biggest games, and it did over and over again, and that was it.
Gotcha. Well, obviously, I know you didn't talk to Lou post-firing. Fun fact, when I was in college, Illinois, they fired John Gross, the men's basketball coach, and he came out at a press conference afterwards, which I thought was the most insane thing ever. I was like, oh, my gosh, you're actually going to talk after they let you go?
Yeah, Marvin Lewis did that here after he was here for 16 years. And they let him go, and he came out and he did a press conference, and he was emotional. Marvin, not known for that at all, and was super emotional during. It was one of the wildest things I've ever seen, and it was crazy.
God bless both men, because if I ever get fired, look, The Athletic, I love working here. I don't want to get fired.
You
but
fire
I'm just
me,
saying,
you're not going to fire. You have to come find me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not giving a press conference in the team facility. But along those same lines, though, similar to players, like when players get cut, when they get released, or when they get traded, they have that chip. So how much do you think Lou wants to prove something in this new chapter that he's going to start in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think he's a very motivated, driven guy. He's a smart dude. It matters to him. I mean, he came here and rebuilt a thing that was ugly to a really special place. The run that they had there over those 2 years is unlike anything they've really had organizationally. And he had such a big part in it. I think he knows how to build that. He knows how to build the culture and make that work too. And he seems, I think the last couple of years were really hard on him. Like, I think he's a prideful dude and felt like he had earned his reputation, and he did. And it took a dent, took a big dent the last couple of years. And I think that he's the type of guy that he doesn't lose that, the desire to constantly be proving people wrong. And I think this would be a good opportunity for him. It's a great spot. I knew it wouldn't be long. When that was sort of the thing, was the Bengals needed a fresh start, and it won't be long until Lou Anarumo has his job. And in fact, he beat the Bengals to the hire.
Yeah.
It won't. It makes sense. But I think he'll have plenty of motivation and chip on his shoulder to kind of prove that he's still the same guy that he was in building this defense the first time.
One of the last ones I have for you was, again, you covered this guy for years. So what was something you learned maybe about him, whether it's coaching, personality, whatever, from the guy getting the job to the guy exiting and starting a new chapter elsewhere?
Yeah. He's kind of been the same guy, I feel like, the whole time. I mean, he's just sort of unabashedly himself. But so I don't know that there was like a change, but he was it's kind of funny because you think about it, when he was hired originally. I mean, first of all, Zach Taylor was a nobody coach. That was basically just a butt of jokes and a punchline for being Sean McVay's friend. And, he didn't have a bunch of cachet to go get a staff with all these stars. He knew Lou Anarumo. They would coach together in Miami. And so he went and got him, but he was like, it was like, Lou Anarumo, who even is this guy? I mean, he'd never been a DC before. He had no name. He had no reputation. It was just like, man, this guy can't find anybody. And he quickly changed that. Now, they were terrible the first 2 years as an entire team, but they didn't have many winning players. That was where it was clearly the players. And he took a lot of pride in finding winning players and helping pick those. And that's a bigger deal here than it is other places, and certainly a bigger deal here than it is in Indianapolis, who has a robust scouting staff. The Bengals notably have a very small one and rely on their coaches. But for that fact, he really, I think, grew into, he earned a real reputation for himself. And I don't think he ever didn't, it's not like he didn't believe he could do it, but once he proved it, you could sense the confidence that he had, and his game plans were bolder, and he asked more and he did more, and he kind of leaned into that reputation of doing crazier, not crazy stuff, I shouldn't say that, but like just not being afraid to be really aggressive and unique. And I think that kind of was a part of what grew in him from a coordinator standpoint, just from the confidence you get from how well they were playing, and the belief that his players would be able to pull off whatever he asked them to do.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet him. And I got to ask about this mad scientist nickname, because I'm like, is he going to walk in with like a white coat?
No, he's not like that. He actually hates that
or something.
He actually hates all the nicknames. This was just something
who
that
gave
players
him these
would
nicknames?
say.
Oh, the players. Okay,
Lou Dini. I mean, yeah, this was just sort of like, it was because, I mean, he would just have this stuff and that would just leave quarterbacks lost. I mean, and really the Patrick, the 2 games against the Chiefs in 21, where they beat them both times, in the regular season, where they, had Patrick befuddled in the second half, and the same thing happened again in the and he had these defenses that would come out and they'd make these adjustments, and they just didn't give up touchdowns in the second halves of games for like whole seasons. I mean, it was unbelievable. And it was because he would find these tendencies and he would exploit them, and he had the ability with the players to do that. And it sort of then you start getting people talking him up, and then they're gonna, the mad scientist, because there's just weird stuff that he would do, and so it's one of those dumb things. He legitimately does not like any of those, though. He's just like, yeah, please stop doing that. Please stop calling me that. But the players do, and we use it because we're suckers for it, so we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And plus, look, when you're winning, all the corny stuff is great, right? Like all the lines, everything works when you're winning. And then when you don't, that's when it's like, I don't want to be known for this anymore. The last thing I'll hit on is, saw a clip from the New Heights show, Travis Kelce and Jason Kelce, and they were talking about Lou, and Travis was saying, I just don't know what's going on over there. He couldn't believe that Lou would be let go.
Yeah.
And so when you see that amount of respect from a guy at his level, obviously a team that's perennially just inevitable, it seems like. What do you think it says about Lou? Just my last question for you. Just about Lou to earn that respect from that team. Now, obviously, there's more teams out there. You got to go out there and beat a lot of them to have a chance to be good in this league. But to earn that sort of, nod of respect from a team that everyone is chasing, around the league.
Yeah, I mean, that was, because they were the one team that was able to go into Kansas City and win. And again, the same thing I said earlier about people didn't talk enough about how the defense was the reason they made it to that Super Bowl, the reason they were so good the next year. They were saving the offense's butt in a lot of those
I thought
games.
It was Joe Burrow playing offense and defense and special teams. That's what
right.
I was told.
That's what you would be. And Jamar Chase, obviously. That's what you would be. I mean, that's all you would hear about. They win 19-16, and and everybody be talking about Joe Burrow, and the defense is like, with 3 turnovers, and it's like, look, if they went in there and people questioned, has Patrick Mahomes lost it? Has he been figured out? Right.
Yeah.
And that was a real thing. That was a real thing, basically from 2 games of Lou Anarumo scheming him up with the drop 8. It would rush 3, drop 8 against Patrick Mahomes over and over and over again. He didn't know what to do. They do this it was just like that stuff, like that leaves an impact on players, right? Players remember games where somebody, when they're never stopped, somebody found a way to do something new to stop them. And that's what Lou did. And it was it was honestly Lou Anarumo versus Andy Reid. And I talked to Lou a bunch about this, is one of the most fun chess matches to watch over the course of my career. Like, every time they'd be playing off of tendencies from what they did differently the last game to counter that, trying to figure out what they're going to do to counter that little wrinkle and add their own little wrinkle. And it was like every game would be a tendency breaker from the last game. And now they've had all these games against each other that they're pulling from so many different pieces. And so that's what guys like Kelce and you hear that's because they know what that is. They know how exhausting it was to go play the Bengals because of the history there was in that series, and how sort of next level that stuff ended up being. They were fun to watch, and I can't imagine how much fun it was to play and wondering how it all was going to go. So I think that's really where it's all rooted in, is just when you have those types of games at that type of level, and you win some, you lose some, there's definitely a certain respect there.
So basically, Paul just said the Colts are going to the Super Bowl. His words, not mine.
Yeah, I hope their defense doesn't look like the Bengals defense that I watched this year, because it was truly gross.
No. I'm sure. At least this, in all seriousness, it'll be different. And that's what a lot of Colts fans wanted. That's what obviously the regime wanted. Indianapolis was something different. And whether that different is good, we'll have to wait and see until the pads, come on later this year. But Paul, thanks again for the time, man. I know you have your own, coaching searches to worry about. But for those listening, say a big thank you to Paul for taking the time to hop on the pod. And so I'm sure I'll catch up with you soon again at some point, whether it's at the combine or other things going on. But for those listening, again, you can always subscribe to the James Boyd Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, we'll talk to you all very, very soon.